the vast majority of simple solutions to complex problems are terrible solutions. Because if the problem was so simple, it would have been fixed years ago. Number one. Number two is it taps into a very different type of narcissism, which is the conspiratorial narcissism that I don't think people talk about enough. In that, to me, conspiracy theorists are infused with narcissism because they go, oh, do you know all of these problems in the world? Do you know who's got the solution to these problems? Yeah, it's me. It's me. You can't see it because you're stupid. But I'm so smart that I can see right through all of these things, and I'm the ones with the answers. When the reality is, it's a confluence of factors coming together and creating a perfect storm, which is what we're seeing now, in my opinion.
Isn't that kind of the same archetype as, let's say, a Scientologist or any kind of read-in or cult kind of situation, right? Or religion in general, but I mean, especially to the extreme degree, it's like people, and just in ordinary religion, people who think they have magical powers or some shit, because like, no, you don't, dude. I'm sorry. Like, your faith is important to you, and I appreciate that, and I think it's good for people and culture to have faith.
Absolutely,
but you don't have magic powers. You don't have special insight into the universe that nobody else has. The stuff that you're saying you could read from a fucking Stoic 2,500, 3,000 years ago. You make it up, right? It's like, where does that come from? It seems to me like it might be a self-defense mechanism against how like fucking complicated and difficult the world can be.
Yeah, because the reality is that you are never going to be able to figure out life. What is happening in the world, you are never going to be able to figure it out. I always see this, I always think this when I see even very intelligent people talking about the nature and the existence of God. I think God, if they exist or it exists or whatever it may be, is so far beyond our ability to comprehend it that it is an act of futility to actually talk about God. A human being trying to understand God is like a cat trying to understand the taxation system. You just can't do it. It's never going to be able to understand it, number one. And I think number two, and this ties in with the woke aspect of it, wokeness is a religion. And to me, it's a conspiracy theory. Because if you think what woke people say, oh, it's the patriarchy who are in charge of everything. Well, how is that different to people going, it's the Jews in charge of everything?
Yeah, or the devil or
whatever,
the devil
or the Illuminati. It's the same thing. This group of powerful men who sit down together and then create this world that we inhabit, where we are completely powerless and people of color are subjugated, and so are women. You go, that's just a conspiracy theory. Oh, the only difference is now it's a conspiracy theory that a lot of high up people say that they believe.
Yeah, that's been the relationship between the patrician class and the plebs throughout all of human history, though, right? The patrician class weaponizes whatever it can, its wealth, power, and the media, I guess you could call it, even if it's just the town crier back in the day. They weaponize all these things to try to convince a plurality or a majority of people to agree that they've been like you. If I'm the king and somebody offends me, I'm like, they're offending your king. You don't say they're offending the king. You say they're offending your king. Like, oh, well, fuck them, right? Yeah. But I don't really care about the king, right? Yeah. So why should I even care about that? This has always been the relationship between the ruling class and ordinary people, and somehow we still, in 2024, despite all the shit that's happened, right? Like, and when I say all the shit, I mean like from the Magna Carta, the French Revolution, our revolution, and the past couple of years where these things have been under attack to some degree. We still don't get it. Yeah. We still don't understand that it's not black versus white, man versus woman, even rich versus poor most of the time. It is people in power versus people who have none. Right. Yeah. And it's always going to be like that. But I just don't. I've tried really hard to communicate that for years now, because every couple of years the Overton window changes to some degree, or we change how we divide ourselves into groups or whatever. But it's always the same concept is always there, and we've never gotten it right. Like there have been populist movements before that have been somewhat successful, but they almost always get captured by some asshole leader or another, right?
Of course.
From the far right, not far, I don't mean far right. Yeah. From the right side, it was Trump. From the left side, it was Bernie Sanders. But, the populist movements have been Mussolini, Hitler. Like, there have been really bad examples. I don't think Bernie Sanders is a bad dude or Trump's a bad dude necessarily. But there have been super bad examples, and then there have been incompetent examples. But they always I guess the passion of the movement always gets captured by some asshole, some lightning rod at the top. It very rarely turns into group activity for some reason.
Yeah, you know what's it's very interesting that you talk about this, because this is actually reflected in music. If you take, for instance, the punk movement, which was anarchic, it was nihilistic, it was very countercultural. It was very anti-authority. If you think about, particularly, I'm talking about British punk as opposed to American punk, where you had the
Like
Sex
Sid Vicious and shit, yeah.
Yeah, we had the Sex Pistols, God Save the Queen, a fascist regime, and that, considering it came out in 1979, was truly deeply shocking. But after a while, punk then became co-opted by the mainstream. They took certain symbols and that got absorbed into mainstream fashion. And then the music got defanged, and then that got co-opted, and then you got sort of soft punk, and it became pop punk and all the rest of it. I think that's just what happens naturally, and that you have these movements and they're bubbling away on the fringes, and then they start to get more and more popular. And then they get co-opted into the mainstream because people start to see, okay, number one, there's something going on here. Number two, that we can make money off this. And number three, we can take this and create something else. And then we can harness it for our own ends.
Yeah, so it basically goes through committee.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess the question is, when you have a righteous cause, how do you get it through committee? And it's at least in a fashion that somewhat resembles the original idea, because it very rarely happens, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that, to be honest. And maybe you can't. Like we talked about this on Drinker Bros, but no system of government scales indefinitely. It can't. How could it? Why should we even expect it to, right?
And why would you want it to?
Yeah, without authoritarianism, it can't scale indefinitely,
Yeah.
right? Which means a government that works for, 1 million people probably won't work for 100 million people, which is why in the United States we have federalism, right? Which is the 9th and 10th Amendments of the Constitution return all power not enumerated in the Constitution back to the states, right? The least amount of people voting on something as possible is going to, each person is going to be represented more, right? So if I vote in the general election, federal election in 2024, which I will, my vote will count 1 out of like 180 million or so.
Yeah.
Now that's not precise because there's an electoral college and shit, but let's just say for the sake of raw numbers, that's the case. If I vote in Texas, it's more like 1 out of 20 million, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like my vote is now 9 times stronger than it was before, and then in a local election, quite a bit stronger than that, right? That's kind of the reason we set things up this way, but even that doesn't scale indefinitely, right? Like you have to. We tend. This is insane to me because no structure in nature will ever work this way. But we always tend to add weight to the top and not the bottom, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. Every solid structure we know, physical or other social, like either way, it's strongest at the base or it doesn't work. But now in all of the West, we keep building. It's like Jenga. We're just taking pieces off the bottom and put them on the top, and we're like in this wobbling society now. And I don't know how long it's going to persist like that.
The problem is, and we touched on it on the other show, which is we are at a place now where in the UK, because I'm going to use this as an example because this is the example I know best, the ruling party are the Conservatives, and they got elected in 2019 with a huge majority, one of the biggest ever majorities in a general election. They decimated the Labour Party, who were practically wiped out. Their lowest election results since, I think, 1932.
Oh, wow.
Okay? And you look at what the Conservatives have done with that mandate, with that political mandate, nothing. They've done nothing. They were told by the public that they wanted immigration lower. Immigration last year, it was 700,000 net. So that includes people leaving. And that doesn't include also illegal immigration, which I think was 40,000 or 50,000, something along those lines. And you go, right, what you are now doing is you are subverting democracy. Because people have elected you, they have told you what they want, you have promised to give it to them, and then you refuse, and then you haven't done it. So people are quite rightly asking, well, what's the point?
Well, what is the point?
I don't know.
I mean,
And bear in mind, I've lived in Venezuela. I've seen the alternatives.
yeah.
So it's not like I'm, some reactionary dickhead here who's going, I want a truly libertarian way of life or whatever it is. Let's overthrow the government. Any of that crap. No. But you asked me that question. I don't have a legitimate answer for you. And that's worrying.
Well, it's, I made the point that any of these movements always have some kind of chief focal point or another. In Argentina, Javier Milei is doing okay, it seems like, right? We'll see.